This is a video I'm putting together on how to rebuild a rack from a Triumph Stag. Now this particular rack is from a 71 left-hand drive car, and this particular, if you see this particular point here, it's an inspection hole to actually adjust the control valve. So this is a very early one. I think it's called an Adwest, and I'm going to be changing a couple of seals in this. They're pretty stable. You don't have to touch them. Actually, the book recommends don't touching it, but I'm going to change a top seal, and then there's a seal inside here. So I'm not going to show you all the details in bits, but what you have to do is, this is the tie rod, and you'll have to undo these tabs. And what I would recommend is don't take this part off unless there's a bit of play in here. And you can get cups, but you'll have to make shims. You could get shim stock, that may work, and there are little round shims in there. But this one seems relatively okay, so what I'm going to do is I've just bent over these tabs. I've got this small spanner. This is interesting. This was actually a 32mm thin spanner, and I opened it up just a little bit so it'll go over this thin nut here. Now you want to be careful. There's probably two tabs that need to be bent over, one on one side, one on the other. And as you turn it, you want to be super careful that you don't actually, the book says don't twist the rod. It's pretty solid, but you just want to be careful. And also another thing I've noticed is on this rack, this metal thing, on the early ones they had a metal aluminium or aluminum ring. On the later ones they had a plastic one. Doesn't really matter. But yeah, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of the pipes off and clean them up. One of them was actually repaired, and we'll see that. Make sure you know the locations of the pipes. For example, what's the inlet, what's the outlet, and which pipe goes where, because if you get those wrong, you're going to have problems. This end I already have taken off. And this is what it looks like with it taken off. There's not much play there. There's a little shim right inside there. Also, you want to be careful you don't lose a little spring. This goes in there. Make sure you don't lose that spring when you remove it. And if you look at my workbench, I'm a very messy worker. I'm actually attempting to do some welding. There's some holes in that rod there. Just a quick update. I've got this end off, and now I'm going to remove the pipes. Now this pipe here on the end, I'm following it with my hand, is actually just, nothing goes there. It's just air. That's when you turn left and right, air actually goes between the two halves and the bellows, or the gators. This one here has pressure, and this one here has pressure. So basically the fluid within the rack is between here and here, and there's a seal that sits in here, and there's a seal that sits in here. And so if this one's damaged, you know, it's not so critical. You could just probably put some rubber hose and Jubilee clip this together just to stop dirt going in. But the two main ones are these, this and this. And what I need to do is I need to undo this thing. And I remember when I had a rally bicycle, they had a special spanner that you could use to grip on the pedal. What do you call it? The axle thingy. I don't have anything this big, but usually a drift and a hammer will do that. Sometimes it does get stuck. You may want to put some sort of lubricating fluid like WD-40 or Plus Gas or anything. Now, what I would recommend is don't take the control valve off now, because what happens is as soon as you take this off And if you do take the control valve off, this rack shaft will slide out, possibly slide out, and it could drop on the floor and it gets scratched. Now this is very critical polished area, especially between this point here and this point. There shouldn't be any rust on there. You can have a little bit of rust on this end. That's this end. This is okay, but this is where the seal runs on the rack shaft, and so this has to be very critical. That's why some people complain that after a year the rack is leaked again because of this part. So the next video I'll take these pipes off, as I said, and hopefully I'll remove this in my bench, and then I will remove the control valve. And I have to be super careful in remembering the orientation of this. I've had trouble with the latter type of control valve not working. It came apart and I couldn't get it to work. This one's actually, I've had another one apart. It's all sealed, so hopefully it won't fall apart in my hands. But let's move on to the next stage. So I've got all the pipes off, and now I need to undo this. As I said, don't remove the control valve yet. You want to get to this thing here. And what I've done, I don't have the special tool, but I just put this aluminium block on one of these little groove where this special key goes in, and I basically give it a good whack. Now some people will switch between the different keys, but I just stick with one, because if you get the actual rebuilder to rebuild it, he'll have the key, and then you can at least use the special tool to remove it. But I have been able to give it a good whack. Little damage, but a little file will bring that back up, and hopefully it should come off. So I got this spanner from a rally bike, at least 40 years ago, 30 or 40 years ago, and this is for the actual crank. So this thing fits pretty well inside that groove once you've cracked it open, and then you can turn the thing. Now I actually, on an older one, I actually bent the spanner. I was a bit upset because it's at least 40 years old, and so I decided to just use a little block and a hammer. So all the other keys are pretty good, but as I said, that particular one that I whacked is a bit damaged. And then you can just undo this. And eventually it slides off. And what you do is you take this end and you just pull it off. If it's stuck, you may need a little hammer to get it off. But yeah, I do apologize. I'm actually using my phone to record this video, so it's a bit difficult for me. I think it did move. It's moving, and it is off. You want to be careful. Oops. So there is actually a seal deep in that groove. I don't know if you can make out. There's one right in there, and there should be an O-ring. You can see just a bit of it on the edge, and that's where the pipes go. As I said, that one there is actually just air. If it doesn't leak, it should be air in there. So that's now come off. So once we got that off, obviously you need to clean that. This needs to slide out, but it won't because of the control valve. So you want to be super careful with this, because as I said, this end has to be super polished. You don't want it scratched or anything. They do rust if the car's not being driven for a long time, and then you have to get a new rack or have it redone. But I need to undo this. This will slide out. Now there's a thing, this is from another rack that I pulled out a long time ago. This bolt here actually screws into this, no, I suppose, whatever union or whatever you call it, goes into this thing here. There's 2 O-rings on either side. The seal sits inside that, and if you look carefully, there's a white ring. It's like a PTFE ring. So those are not available in the kit. So you want to be super careful and extracting the shaft. So the book, the ROM, says that as we extract the rack shaft from the body, and I apologize, it can actually catch on these teeth and damage it. Now what I noticed in another rack is it's actually, these are lower, and so if you say leave it upright, the chances of damaging that seal in there is less, but you still don't want to take a chance. And again, that white PTFE ring is not available in there. It's a critical part of the rack. And now this thing is inside here, and I would not recommend putting a metal drift in there to push it out. Get something wood, because it's a polished sleeve, and as you can see, there's 2 O-rings on either side that basically make a nice type seal within the inside of this tube. So again, when I undo this, the rack shaft will slide out, and then you'll need to push this out. So the thing is, it comes out this way. It can't come out this way because it gets blocked up with the control mechanism. This thing you don't need to undo. To turn this over, I'm going to undo this control valve, and I'm going to be super careful removing that because I want to make sure I know the orientation. And another thing you want to be taking an eye out is this thing here. That puts a little bit of a tension on the rack shaft, and there's some documents on how to adjust that, but I will take that out and clean it all up. So now I'm going to take the control valve out, and this is the early one, as I said, and I do recall this thing, when you pull it out, it's one piece, but the later ones are made of 2 pieces, and if you pull it out and it slips, you've got to make sure you get the orientation right. And believe me, I've had struggling with that one for a long time. So I'm going to switch off. I'm going to take these 3 off, and then this one, the interesting thing is there's a seal in here, whereas the later ones don't have a seal in here. There's a seal at the inside this thing, and then there's a seal at the top, whereas the latter control units don't have a seal at the bottom. Now apparently the documentation says you can change the control unit for a ladder one to this body. They're pretty the same, but I haven't tried that. Now again, this is a left-hand drive rack. There's the pipes are different on the right-hand drive, and also this control valve, the threads are oriented the other way to mesh with this gear on the rack shaft. Now I do have a right-hand drive shaft, and looks exactly the same as this, but this control unit is different. And then obviously this is also different because it's for a left-hand drive car. So I've undone the 3 bolts holding the control valve in, and this is the actual control valve. Normally what happens is this thing will come out the control valve. In this case, you can see that bearing that's stuck in the body, but this is the, as I mentioned, the old control unit. There's a little adjustment. It's actually an a screw that's actually off-centered. So as you rotate it, I think that adjusts it, but you don't want to touch that. I haven't found any documentation on how to adjust that properly. Probably leave that to the experts, but you actually, to get to it, you undo this cover. You put a screwdriver in and you can tweak that left or right. And I think that's what keeps it, when it's centered, stops the rack from trying to turn the wheel. But it seems like in this particular one, there's a O-ring that sits at the top of here. You take the circlip off, and then we have to take this out because there's a seal underneath this bearing. Now on the later unit, this whole thing is sealed, and there's no chance of fluid getting into this. But in this one, there's a seal here, and there's a gasket. So that's critical on putting this type, the earlier type, back together. So. Okay, here's another view. As I said, this control valve got stuck in there. Now, the old one, the nice thing about it, this whole thing is one piece, whereas the later one actually slips off, and it can go either way, 180 degrees out, and then you got problems. Now, if this is stuck, in this case, this is what I could do is put the intermediate shaft on the end of this and, pull it out with the just with a drop dead hammer or something. Now also another thing is, as I told you, you want to be super careful. This rack shaft slides out and you don't want it to fall out on the floor. This is the very critical part of the rack shaft that has to be very polished. There is some little bit of wear on that, but it is reusable compared to one that's got complete rust on it. And now this thing slides in and out. Now I noticed on the newer one that I have, or another one, later one, it's actually it's a PTFE, so I may swap that out since I have one of those. And then again, there's this end thingy that takes a little bit of puts a bit of tension on that rack shaft. You take this out and you put a grease nipple on there, and you grease it up, and there is a spring here, and there's a little plate in there. I usually see if I can pull it out with this magnet. No, I can't. Okay, I'll have to turn it upside down and take it out, and then take that out. Now, and again, you want to be super careful when you pull this out. This rack shaft can slide, and because it's so slippery, you don't want this part to get damaged. And as I said, this is the critical part up until this point. Actually, a bit more than that, just maybe up to about here. The rest of it, if it's rusty, it's okay. But as I said, there's that little thing that's actually sits inside that we've got to pull out. That's inside there. And then this basically butts up on that. This butts up on that, it slides, stops it going that way all the way through. And there's some other stuff here. And that is more or less how you dismantle a rack. As I said, this is the earlier rack. I find this a lot easier than the later rack because of this control valve. I've had problems with the control valve, and there's other people put pictures on how to get that right. Okay, so I put the intermediate shaft on the end of this, and I used the hammer to pull it out. Not the hammer, I used a mallet actually. So the bearing came out, as you can see. And it came out of here. Now there is, as I said, the earlier one has a seal inside this orifice here, and that needs to be changed. So I haven't really figured out how to do that on this one. And the later one, as I said, doesn't have a seal here. It has a ring in there, and it's all enclosed. But this one, this is the seal. So the bearing actually gets lubricated with the brake fluid. And the nice thing about this one is it doesn't fall apart, whereas the other one does. It slides out. So another thing, as I mentioned, now we can take the rack shaft out. And what I would recommend you do is, you can't see it, and I'm not going to pull it because it's stuck actually. It won't go back in easily at this end. But make sure the teeth are facing up. And then withdraw it very, very slowly. And so you'll minimize the amount of damage that happens on the seals in there. And this, as I said, this is a spare one, but you'll have to change the seal in this. And the PTFE ring is not available, so be super careful. And then these O-rings also you can change. So I'm going to withdraw the shaft very carefully. And then, as I said, you need to undo this. And this union, or whatever you want to call it. And then it's connected to this, and then drift this out with something soft, not too hard, because as I said, it has to be, you want to scratch the surface of the inside of that tube. And that should be basically it on dismantling. These things typically don't go wrong. They're PTFE tapes. I've rebuilt a rack before, different type. I never changed this one. Again, there's actually a PTFE ring that you can get for that, so I probably will swap that off there only. But there are people who heat them up and do some stuff in warm water and put them on, but I found they're pretty solid and they don't wear out. I need to figure out how to take this bearing out, this bush, sorry, this seal. And then here's a gasket, it's ripped, and then on the top you just use a pair of soap, clip pliers, and there is a bearing in there, usually doesn't wear out too much. If you can see that, I'm trying to get the light, but there's a bearing in there and a seal. It's pretty easy to change. And then clean it up, and then the reassembly. And I'll try and create a video on reassembly. The real critical part with reassembling is making sure when you put this in, you got to basically push it in with a hammer. Well, you put the rack in first, the rack shaft in, and you push this in slowly with this. Now the problem is this hole needs to be lined up with this thing, so if it's off, you're not gonna be able to get it on there. So as long as you're close enough, then you can line it up with some sort of a podger type thing and get it lined up. But as I said, when you push this in, you got to push it in slowly. Make sure this hole is lined up with this, otherwise you'll never do it, and then you'll have to pull it out again. And the thing is, every time you pull it out, you've got the chances of getting this seal damaged by the teeth of the rack shaft. So hopefully you can, I'll stitch all the videos together. And again, sorry for the phone video, but thought I'll put this together on disassembling. And reassembling is pretty much a reversal of the assembly. As I said, just be careful with this thing here, putting that in. And some people I've seen, when you take this off, there's a circlip. You want to make sure you don't scratch this. Again, this is the very critical part of the shaft that has to be smooth. And I've heard stories where people say they've had theirs rebuilt and it leaks within a year. It's probably because this has been compromised. And that bit, maybe just probably the first 10 inches or so is critical. As I said, this part here, from here to here, doesn't really matter if it's rusty. A bit of grease will be okay in there. On the left-hand drive rack, these gears go in this direction. On the right-hand drive, they go in the other direction, so you can't change them. I was trying to be smart, and didn't happen. So here's the rack shaft out of the rack, and as I said, keep going on about this is the critical part. And I don't know if you can see with the camera, but there is a bit of wear on there. So at some point it will need fixing. Another point to notice is there's a little machining that was done, and as you withdraw this thing, it actually goes over this part, and that's where it actually, they say that the teeth can damage this. The teeth can damage the PTFE tape. But as I said, if you bring it out this way, the teeth are actually lower. Let's see if you can see. They're not sticking up as much, so you are okay. You can reuse it. It's a little scratched here, but it's not a big deal. As I said, now I'm gonna. This is the spare one. This is from another rack that's actually worn. And now I'm going to just undo this and drift this. I think it's called a sleeve. I forget. Drift that out. And then change the seals. So that's you get the idea. It's not as difficult as it's made out. I think if this part's damaged, then you're pretty much hosed and you want to have a specialist take a look at it. But on the whole, it's relatively simple. And again, I think if you have the earlier control valve, it's even more simpler. And typically where they leak is this seal here and the seal at the end, and you get fluid coming out of the bellows. Doesn't really leak here too much. That's pretty stable. So sometimes, last time I rebuilt a rack, I didn't even touch the control valve. I just changed the two seals on this end. It did actually last a few years, and then it started leaking out of this. So then at that point I said, nah, just change all of it in one go. So removing the rack on a left-hand drive Stag took me about 2 to 3 hours. I'd probably say 3 hours. And the one thing that you should do is remove the downpipe, the left downpipe, away completely. You can just loosen it off and push it down by about 2 inches, but I find it easier if you remove it completely to get the rack out. It's a bit awkward, a little bit of an awkward job. And then undo the 4 bolts that hold this rack to the bracket that's on the cross member. And then, so what I did, this is the thing that actually came out, and you want to make sure it goes in. This is the direction it goes back into the rack. And again, you want to make, you got to, so to get it out, I used a dowel, heavy dowel, and pushed it down and used a hammer to push it out. Now, as I said, you don't want to scratch the inside of that rack itself. This comes out, and as I said, there's that. This is the actual one that came out of this one. The white PTFE ring is in there. And on assembly, when you change it, make sure, as I said, this bolt, this hole, is in line with this hole in the middle. This actually goes in there. If you push it in an angle and you push it in, there's no way you can rotate it. So you got to be close. There's no way, if you're off a little bit this way or that way, there's no way you're going to get it in line without pushing it through. So that is it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and clean this. I'm going to take this ring off. It's just a simple ring sprung loaded on there. Just need a screwdriver to lever it off. I probably will take this off or leave it on there and then clean it up and give it a good coat of paint. As I said, I've got to figure out how to take this seal out. I haven't done that before, but I'm not sure how I'm going to do that. Okay, if you have any suggestions, let me know, and appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, so basically I was trying to figure out how to get the seal out of the bottom of this rack part, and you just get a screwdriver and lever it out. Actually, I don't think you can make out. It's got a little lip on there, so it goes inside this way, and you just push it inside the seal, inside the groove, and that's it. So hopefully I have ordered a repair kit, and hopefully I'll just change all the seals. And as I said, you want to be careful specifically with this seal here, the PTFE ring. Don't damage that, don't lose it. You're going to have a tough, because they aren't available. I tried looking, but you know, if that's gone, you probably have to take it to a shop and let them have a look at it. But I'm hoping I can rebuild this one. As I said, I have struggled with one of them. I've sort of had a hit or miss, but this one, as I said, the control valve is good. So yeah, that's how I pull out this seal. This thing doesn't come out. Apparently, This ring can come out, and they said that you can interchange the control valve to this shaft. It's the same, but I will stick with what I have. And go from there. I did remove this, even though I didn't need it. It's just basically air in there, but I thought I'll take it out. I got this out, as I said. So you know, if you have ideas of putting it in the your wife's dishwasher, I wouldn't recommend it, because there's a bearing right at the bottom of that, and it'll probably just rust out. So yeah, just put it in some gasoline or petrol or paraffin or whatever you feel you do. I took this ring off. I'm going to give it a coat of paint and then start reassembling once I get the kit. I'll go from there. All right.